Hey, this is Pops. I'm hanging out here in the man cave, getting ready to tear apart John Deere carburetor. But first, no, it's not for safety. It's for vision. Got a TSX 530 carburetor. We just got through ordering a kit. Got another John Deere 40 running. That's two now. But what I wanted to have a talk tonight about was something interesting called dwell. And you say, dwell, what in the world? Okay, well, some of you are saying, yeah, you think you know dwell. Well, I think I remember dwell. I used to measure it. Not exactly sure what dwell is precisely. I can't remember if it's the amount of time the cam dwelled the points. Now we're talking points in condenser ignition system, conventional from way back. Okay, let's go with that, step one. By the way, the soaker basket for this as I tear it apart. Now, some of you know what that'll be, some of you don't. Points in condenser is how ignition systems used to work. You'd have an ignition coil that had power. Power would come in one side, which is often with a negative ground system, which is standard anymore. And you say, well, who had anything different? Well, they used to have positive ground 6-volt systems and some early 12 volts. Why? The claim was it allowed it for better flow, and starters, the system worked better. I'm not 100% certain that is true, but that was the claim. Later on, when they had 12-volt systems, because so many farmers had 6-volt batteries, that there were a lot of John Deere 620s, 630s and such, 730s, 720s out there that had, I think there were 720s, but I remember the 30s in particular. We had one or two in Bosse's. They would put two 6-volt batteries in there and claim that it had more cranking amperage. It did not. Two 6-volt batteries are in there to give you 12 volts to run the 12-volt system. It worked just as if you had a single 12-volt battery. So a lot of people just gave that up and put two 12 volts in there. Why? Because you have 12 volts, and here's the key, if you put batteries in series, in other words, two 6 volts, negative ground, positive to the negative of the other battery, to the positive, and that go to your starter and your other systems, your main power feed, not ground, but to your other actual electrical system, then that increased your voltage. But whatever amperage was in the batteries, usually whatever was available in the weakest battery is all you had through the system. It's just the way of life, the way of electricity. Now, if you take two 12 volts and hook them in parallel, it doesn't change the voltage. That doesn't step up. However, your amperage availability does. It doubles. 6 volt, it doesn't change, but you doubled your voltage. Same amps, double volts. When they're in series. When they're in parallel, meaning negative to negative, positive to positive, positive going to power everything and negative going to ground, that type of thing, you can switch it, doesn't matter, but that's the way I'm talking tonight. When they're in parallel, negative to negative, positive to positive, then your voltage doesn't change, but your amperage doubles. And you got to have pretty good sized wires to get it out of there. Now, what often goes with that is they'll have, say, 1-aught wires, or even number 2 or number 1 wire on it, unless you're in a really heavy duty diesel. They'll have smaller wires on a 12-volt system. Why? Because it's carrying half the amps, usually, for the same work. Usually. But as we all know, that's not quite the case. But if you're running... Now let's back up. We'll go directly. One 6-volt battery and one 12-volt battery running the same system. Well, if the starter needs so much horsepower or torque to turn the same engine, and the 6-volt system, let's say it's a little Ford tractor, the 6-volt system might draw 300 amps, 400 amps to turn that starter. and get the engine going. The 12-volt system will be 150 to 200 amps. Volts times amps equals watts. The motor doesn't care if it's built for 12 volt, built for 6 volt. The motor doesn't care. It wants watts. If it's doing the same job, watts of power. That's the electrical version of horsepower, torque, etc. So that's the first thing to think about. So let's go back to our ignition. Now you understand our power source. You go into the ignition, you got your coil. It could be square, it could be round, it could be any one of a number of things, right? You're going into it, and if it's a positive ground system, then you're going to have the negative side, negative hot lead from the battery, ignition switch, and all that go into the coil. If it's a negative ground system, positive goes into the coil, positive side. If you have a positive ground system, now negative is your electrical system from the battery through the switches and wires to your coil, and the coil needs to be turned so that the negative of the coil is hooked there. Okay? Now that's with a positive ground system, the old ones. What we're working with today with two John Deere 40, actually two of them, and they're positive ground systems. So the coils have to be hooked up with the negative side. The wire from the key switch goes to the negative side. Goes through your coil, comes out in the positive side, goes through your points and condenser, points in particular, and it grounds through the distributor, so you have to have your circuit, right? So you're talking negative here, going through the switches and electrical system. The distributor grounds that, and that goes into the positive side, back to the ground side. That's right, positive ground to the battery. Makes your full circle. Now, what I want to talk today about is dwell, points and condenser, and that kind of thing, and partially timing. Now, these tractors generally, I didn't even look it up in the book. I just set it. Why? Because these tractors might be hand cranked. So I set it up. The distributor advance worked, so I made sure it stayed back, unadvanced, all the way back. And then after that, what we do is you clean your points, set your points, and then you check the timing. There's two ways to do it, and one of them is, in this case, our point gap is 22 thousandths. I read the dang book, 22 thousandths, 0.022. That is the gap that they want. John Deere, in a Delco distributor. I don't know why. I have the same distributor on the case and the Ferguson. And originally they wanted 20 thousandths gap, not 22. Why? I don't know. But John Deere, with that same distributor, essentially has 3 lobes. It does. It's the funniest darn thing you ever saw. But it has 2 lobes to fire the spark plugs, and then it opens the points. So when it comes around, it goes pop, pop. But the points are open, and it keeps them cooler. As crazy as that sounds, it's what they do. So when I went to set the lobe, I have to look at it closely again. You might just be talking there's one nub, and then there's the continuous one. So it'd go points close, points open, points close, points open, and stay open until they come all the way around. Excuse me. A lot of small engines were like that in the past. They'd have one little space where points close and open. And that's how they got the spark. Points closing energizes it, but there's no spark until you open the points. And then a collapsing field, because it's lightning fast, we're talking speed of light here, will collapse. And because the magnetic field goes up, it doesn't do much. But if it does anything, the condenser's there to grab it. And then, as the points snap open, the condenser catches any residual juice, because the primary side's going to have up to 200 volts in it, or more. And then the secondary side, all this field that the primary made, starts down. And what's it do when you run a magnet across? Well, now it's like an electromagnet, because there's a core in there. So as the field goes up and down, you get your spark as it comes down, collapses. That's what the condenser is for, to assist it in collapsing. So you set your points, they're at 22 thousandths, right? Everybody's happy. Not yet. No, what am I studying at this point? Well, you're going to turn your engine over till number 1 is top dead center. Get your marks, because in this case, that's what the distributor initial timing is 0, top dead center. What do? You take the distributor, aim it to number 1 cylinder, correct? You turn your engine over, you're on TDC, you make sure you're top dead center. The distributor rotor is going to be aimed to number 1 cylinder. So you take your distributor cap off. You heard me right, off. You take your coil wire, and you can put a spark plug in it. No, I was able to do it today, I think, through the distributor, but quite often you just use the coil wire. All right, mount it, put it someplace. If you got an old spark plug, that's even better. Take the side electrode completely off. As strange as it sounds, this is true. You can take the side electrode, that little crooked one, and throw it away so it jumps from the center gap out to the sidewall. That gives you an idea of the strength of your spark. Set that aside. Now, loosen your distributor. If your rotor is counterclockwise, like this one was today, you turn the distributor counterclockwise till the points close. Take your shaft, turn it back, snug, backwards, clockwise, and hold it, and then release it, just so it sits there. Now you take, that's in case there's any play in the timing mechanism. Take your distributor and turn it back against it. Its rotor is turning counterclockwise. If you turn the distributor clockwise, essentially you're turning the distributor instead of the shaft to come into the same location. Instead of this one turning up to open the points, you're turning this one to come back and open the points. Turn the distributor, tick. Check it a couple times, tick. Snug the bolts down, you're good. That's your initial time. Yeah, it'll be off a little bit, but you're pretty close to TDC. In fact, quite often you end up advanced because you usually tick and you can't quite stop. That's why I say check it a couple of times after. Your initial timing is set. It's all good. You can check it with a timing light after that. It's probably not going to be the same unless you keep the idle very slow. Because tractors, they advance pretty quick as soon as you start throttling up. They're designed to. But not tremendously fast. So, just keep the speed down and put your timing light on it. If it's within a couple of degrees, leave her alone. One way or the other. Just go out and drive it. See if it has the power that you want and the fuel economy. Now, I wanted to talk about a thing called dwell. This goes back to the GM days in the 60s, maybe even in the 50s. What is dwell? Well, I believe it's the angle from when the points close, the number of degrees that the distributor shaft turns until the next cam lobe when the points open. Number of degrees the distributor turns when the points are closed. Why? Because that changes when the next cylinder, number 2, the second one in the firing order, not necessarily number 2 cylinder, but the next one in the firing order fires. Get my drift? You've set number 1. That's going to be the same every time. But after that, that's what dwell changes. But what changes dwell? Well, it took me a while to figure this out because there was too many people that didn't teach me. Your point gap sets your dwell. That's why if you see 15 thousandths for your magneto, 15 thousandths. 14, 16, you can play with a little bit, but you need it 15 thousandths. And what do I mean? You want it just enough so your little teeny short, the short feeler gauges can slide in there and by its own weight might slowly, not just drop through, but slowly fall through. Just a nice light rub. You can gently turn it, make sure, take your time, light fingers. Setting points is a feel, but it's not an art form. It's a little bit of skill. It's a skill level. You'll lose it after a few years, and you'll get it back, but dexterity. As you get arthritis, it's a problem, but you can still do it. Now, you set your point gap 22 thousandths. Your dwell is pretty close to set. Let's say you set it at 20. What's that mean? It means the points don't open as far. which means the rotor has to turn farther to pop them open. You've set your timing at 22. Now close it to 20. Check your timing again with your timing light. Yeah, if you want to play with this game, set your timing light with everything set properly, okay? 22 thousandths, turn the distributor, tick, turn the engine over, check it with your timing light, while it's idling. See what you got. And then the next one you want to do is reach up and close the point gap from 22 to 20 or from 20 to 18. Don't do it on a magneto. It's bad results because half of them are on there to be hand starts. Don't bother. And be sure the magneto is different. You want to time your magneto? It's similar to the distributor, but what are you doing? You're setting your timing marks and then you're turning the magneto backwards. Then make sure you've got those wires grounded. But whatever your rotation is, you're turning the magneto same way, opposite the shaft rotation. So instead of the shaft coming to the points, you're turning the points to a set position of the shaft. Your timing mark's there, your shaft's where it needs to spark. You turn it until you hear whack! That's your impulse. And it'll spark, baby. You got a good magneto, good points. Woo-hoo! 20,000 or better. That'll wake you up. Just say, oh, it's nothing. Modern cars. 60, 70, 80, 100,000 volts. They have to. So, a rich mixture in the engine is easier to fire than a lean mixture because you're in air. Air is generally an insulator. You have less fuel. And plus, it's all compressed in there, and it has to jump the gap. You've got an insulator in there. Needs a lot more energy to jump it. When it's rich, you got a liquid in there. It's going to fire a lot easier. All right, so now you've checked your timing. What happened? You lost a few degrees, didn't you? Okay, last I played, and I haven't done this with a lot of different engines, just something I noticed on some others I monkeyed with, because we used to do points and condensers in cars years ago. We're antique tractors now. It's critical unless you turn. Even putting in your electronics, Pertronics will tell you, set your points and condenser and get your timing, everything right. Get a good, solid ignition system. You say, well, that'll cost me a new set of points. Yeah, probably. Well, I'm going to pay $150 for the Pertronics. Yeah, probably. I'm going to spend $200 one time. Unless you're stupid and put on a hyper battery charger and don't disconnect it. And you turn the key on. Poof, yeah, your Pertronics is gone, baby. Why? Because the old-fashioned battery chargers, 16, 17, 18 volts. Some of them as high as 20. So when you hooked them to the battery, they'd snap and arc and cause a problem, but once they were working, they dropped back down to 15 volts, 14, 16, in that neighborhood to charge your battery. Fact of life, it's the easier way to do it. Yes, it's a 12-volt battery charger. Optimum nominal voltage is 14 and a half. Well, on the battery chargers, 15, 16, just to give it a boost to going. And as the battery comes up, that voltage will drop. Well, your voltage will drop back with a low battery. It'll only run about 14. If it's seriously low, it'll go down to 13 because it's sucking amps like a mad bandit. And then as it doesn't need any more amperage, then the voltage will start to rise to get it in there. Well, still, your open circuit volts, when you go to hook it up, it can jump. Now you have to be careful. That'll blow your Pertronics quite often, I'm told. I haven't had it happen. Well, if you set your points, condenser, and everything properly to your timing set, you drop the Pertronics in, timing is set. Now, I've done it twice, and both times it's worked beautifully. So go back to dwell now. We're not electronics. We're being cheap. We're setting it for the first time. We want it right. What happens when you went from 22 thousandths to 20? Your dwell changed. Now your points are staying closed longer. An interesting fact why I tell you to be careful and take your time setting points and don't let anybody rush you. Okay? Is because every 1,000th of point gap change, what I've seen over the years from experience is 2 to 3 degrees in timing change. Well, I just turned the distributor. You're not listening to what I said the first time. You turn the distributor and that first cylinder is timed. But your dwell changed. Now the next lobe, when you've come down from 22 to 20, it goes further before it hits the next lobe. a la retarded timing the rest of the way around. That's why sometimes you get one with a loper when they're way off. Okay? Points need to be set properly. They used to say tighten up that point gap and make it. No. Now, conversely, you set it at 22 thousandths or 20 thousandths is what it's supposed to be set at. Like my Ferguson, 20 thousandths. We're not talking Fords. That's 20. That's different. Okay. We're talking the old-fashioned distributors in most tractors, the Delcos, 20 thousandths. Okay. Briggs and Stratton, 20 thousandths. Tecumseh, 20 thousandths. Kohler, 20 thousandths. Don't ask me why. They all like 20. 0.020. Well, let's say you've set it, you've timed it, and you're at 20. Well, now, open it up to 22. Here's your 22. Open it up to 24. Say you are a Ford guy, and you have set your side distributor on the Ford tractors, from the 8 inside distributor up to, 64 is it? 25. Well, bump it up to 26, 27. Watch your timing change. Wider the gap means the points open further. To do that, excuse me, you have to move the point set, rubbing block and all, down inside between the two cam lobes that would open the points. What's that mean? You've changed your dwell. Now your dwell is shorter. The points are closed for less of a period of time. Then they're open further because they hit the ramp early. Now they open up longer and further and then come down. You get rubbing block wear. You're out of time all the way around. Now you've advanced some of the other cylinders and you've got another loper. Different reason. When your point gap is set correctly and your dwell is set correctly, that means every cylinder after that's going to fire properly, smoothly around the circle. If you change your points to change your timing, you better have done it because your distributor is so tight in there you're going to bust it. Okay? It's the only reason to do that. The other thing I have done as well, though, is that you can change the position. You got to have your gap right. You can't screw around with it. Let's just leave it that way. I don't want to get you guys confused any further. You're saying, huh? Point gap changes the dwell. 1 degree of dwell change. Well, 1 degree of dwell here changes the timing outside as well on the spark plug. So every thousandth that you change your points, one way or the other, changes your timing 2 to 3 degrees, and that's just your initial timing on the one cylinder. Now, say you change the time, okay, so that you're not looking at a problem. I open my points gap up 2 thousandths. Ooh, I'm looking at more power and advanced timing. Not necessarily. You've set it at the first cylinder. That one will now be on proper time the whole time. The rest of them will not. I don't believe it's exponential as you go around, but it's be the same as your timing's 5 degrees on number 1. Yeah, but your dwell isn't right. So the next cylinder, if your point gap is closed 2 thousandths, your next cylinder is going to hit retarded all the way around back to number 1. And if you open it up, the next cylinder is going to hit advanced. How much? Every thousandths is 2 to 3 degrees change. So if you open the point gap up a thousandths, you've advanced 2 to 3 degrees on the others. If you've closed the point gap, every thousandths is 2 to 3 degrees retarded. And you can notice a big, big difference. Now, another one to be careful of if you're one of those that tried to be a purist like I used to be, and I found out later on that there were problems with the old dwell meters. The dwell meter is I used to set them down and watch it so I could watch them. And I found out a lot of the meters had to be set upright or they wouldn't work correctly. I had a lot of machines that I set the wrong dwell on. They still ran good. In fact, some people said, man, that is smooth. I had one of them, I took a 20-some thousandths point gap down to 17. He says, it's no more power than before. I'm not sure it has as much, but I don't want it changed. And I said, why? He says, never had to run that smooth. Okay. He was happy. We left it. It was a 345 International gas engine in a dump truck. And in the 70s, it was an old dump truck. Ran beautiful, but later on, he says, I want that power. So we reset the dwell and point cap and got the timing set, and we ended up with our power back. But now we ran into another problem. It's called ping and knock. Internationals were prone to it. They were tough engines, but you could set the timing correctly, and if you did, you couldn't run the engine, especially on unleaded gas. So anyway, those are the things I wanted to talk about tonight on points and dwell and such. The last one I want to leave you with. None of this will matter if you're running even 10% ethanol fuel in your points condenser tractor, any carbureted machine of any kind. Some of you are going to say, it doesn't matter, I haven't. Fine, you haven't had any trouble. Beautiful, knock yourself out. Because I frankly don't care. But two things come with that. One of them is there is no system that has not been designed for ethanol that can operate properly with it, and B, there is no system that will stay functioning. Main thing is the ethanol will actually get water in there. The water will bind with the ethanol and pull it out from its emulsified state in the gasoline into beads in the bottom and then sludge. It'll rot right through aluminum. You hope it rots through the aluminum if there's any in the system. Because if it doesn't, everything gets all gunked up, caked up, and you end up either replacing it all, which a lot of people do with the fancy new cheap Chinese carburetors on small engine stuff. But even on your tractors with a cast iron, and some of them do have aluminum bodies, it is problematic stuff if you're not running the tractor almost every day. It just is. You're going to tell me it isn't? I don't care. I won't call you a liar this time. I'll call you a liar if you tell somebody else it doesn't cause a problem. Because it does. 100% of the people I know that are working in the field, that work with gas engines, has said the very same thing. Chainsaws and diaphragm carburetors, it's destructive. All right. Well, I'm going to leave that with you and continue to work on my carburetor. You folks have a good day. We're coming up on 28 minutes. Better than my normal. Peace out. This is Pops of Seth Howard's Repair Service saying, see ya. Yeah, it's a one-horse operation, but it sounds so much cooler.